keep demanding Israel to revoke this decision, we're also empowering it to have more control over us. Like, is it by day and night they decide who's a terrorist organization and who's not?
The Electronic Intifada.
The Electronic Intifada.
The Electronic Intifada.
This is the Electronic Intifada podcast. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman.
And I'm Asa Winstanley.
Welcome back to the Electronic Intifada podcast. Israel's designation of 6 major Palestinian rights groups as, quote, terrorist organizations on October 22nd has elicited an immediate and strong response from human rights defenders. Dozens of human rights organizations in Israel jointly condemned the move, which was announced by Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz as a, quote, act of cowardice that is, quote, characteristic of repressive authoritarian regimes. They called on the international community to, quote, oppose this decision unequivocally. The human rights groups Al-Haq, Defense for Children International Palestine, Addameer, the Union of Palestinian Women's Committees, the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, and the Bisan Center for Research and Development have cooperated closely with the International Criminal Court in its war crimes probe in the West Bank and Gaza. UN special rapporteurs have warned that the Israeli designation would effectively ban the work of the human rights groups. It provides a pretext for Israel to arrest their staff, close their offices, and seize their property. As the Electronic Intifada has reported, Israel has long sought to defame and sabotage the work of Palestinian human rights groups seeking to end Israeli impunity, while senior Israeli figures and lobby groups baselessly accuse these groups of, quote, weaponizing the ICC against the US and Israel. Today, we're speaking with representatives of 2 of the 6 Palestinian human rights groups, Asil Al-Baji, legal researcher and advocacy officer at Al-Haq, and Milena Ansari, international advocacy officer at Addameer. Asil and Milena, thank you so much for being with us on the Electronic Intifada podcast.
Thank you for hosting us.
Of course. Asil, let's begin with you. Much of the work that Al-Haq does centers around documenting Israeli war crimes and trying to hold Israel to account. Tell us about that work and give us a sense of what this designation by Benny Gantz aims to do to your organization.
Absolutely. So we've actually been operating in the occupied Palestinian territory since 42 years now. And since the 70s, the organization has been documenting and monitoring the human rights situation, as well as documentation to do advocacy work in various ways, including at the International Criminal Court, as you mentioned, but also at the United Nations level with the special procedures at the Human Rights Council and with policymakers to try to push that Israel ends its illegal apartheid regime and military occupation against the Palestinian people. In terms of what does this designation mean to us as Al-Haq, but also as the Palestinian civil society and human rights defenders, and also as the Palestinian people as a whole, because this represents an escalated attack within institutionalized and ongoing efforts to silence any effort seeking to challenge Israel's crimes and violations against the Palestinian people. Civil society groups, including Al-Haq in Palestine, seek to amplify what is going on the ground and to advocate for a better future for the Palestinian people. So we see it as part of the whole repression of the Palestinian people, but also our work has been also subjected to smear campaigns and intimidation by the Israeli occupying authorities since decades now, including death threats for individuals at Al-Haq, for example, related to our work at the International Criminal Court, but also arbitrary arrests. I think Milena can highlight more on that and the fact that we are also subjected to residence revocation. So this is part of an institutionalized effort to silence any effort, as I said. How do we respond to that is that our struggle as the Palestinian people will not stop with these failed attempts to silence our voices. we nonetheless are subjected to threats of being arrested and for our assets to be also confiscated as well. So we do need the international community and the global human rights movement to stand with us.
Thank you. And Milena, talk about the work at Addameer, which advocates for the rights of Palestinian prisoners, as Asil mentioned. In 2019, your offices in Ramallah were raided and computer equipment was seized by Israeli occupation forces. The same thing happened to Defense for Children International Palestine's offices just weeks ago. Addameer has been under constant attack by Israel, as all the 5 other groups have been. Tell us about Addameer and how this designation is designed to stop your work.
Yes, thank you. To begin with, Addameer Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association is a Palestinian non-governmental association that provides free legal aid to Palestinian political prisoners held both in Israeli prisons and under the Palestinian Authority's prisons. We also advocate for the rights of Palestinian prisoners on an international and a national level. The documentation unit at Addameer, through their prison visits and legal files and cases, they have documented systematic and arbitrary policies by the Israeli prison services against the Palestinian prisoners, such as medical neglect, arbitrary collective punishment, isolation, and many other arbitrary and harsh ill treatment in prisons. As you mentioned, Addameer has been a target of this Israeli-led attacks for many years. This is an attack that has been ongoing by harassments of, as Asil mentioned, residency revocation, arbitrary arrests under administrative detention, which means without any charges or without any trial for an indefinite time. So this has been an escalation for a long time. During the raid in 2019, Addameer was taking on cases of torture, where detainees were subjected to extreme torture techniques against them during interrogation, where one of them, within 48 hours, he was taken to the hospital and under critical, his life was at imminent risk. So when Israel feels that the work of human rights organizations is really taking action and maybe is asking accountability in a strong voice, they start attacking in bizarre and arbitrary measures, such as the decision of designating our legitimate human rights work as terrorist. This is absolutely bizarre, but this is truly not surprising because the international community has been silent with everything that has been going on. Shada Audi, the director of the health work committees, is now in detention under ill and arbitrary conditions, and she's the director of the health work committees. And the world stayed silent when she was arbitrarily arrested, just because Israel decided that the health work committees is an unlawful organization and they get to completely shut down legitimate Palestinian providing public services to vulnerable communities. So we do also have to let the international community know that, now is the time to actually stand up with the 6. And when we say 6, it's not only these 6 organizations, we're saying the Palestinian people as a whole. Sorry, just to one thing, when we keep demanding Israel to revoke this decision, we're also empowering it to have more control over us. Like, is it by day and night they decide who's a terrorist organization and who's not, depending on how far they're getting in the international community? So this must end. We must not bow down to this harassment and bullying.
Yeah, thank you. UN human rights experts warned that, quote, this designation is a frontal attack on the Palestinian human rights movement and on human rights everywhere. Can you talk a little bit more about the ramifications of this designation? Addameer, for example, advocates for Palestinian political prisoners. As you mentioned, some of its officers have been arbitrarily arrested and detained. At this point, does a designation like this leave, you and Asil and members and staff of these organizations vulnerable to arrest and administrative detention at this point? What are you, what could happen? What are you expecting?
My answer could come in different aspects. We're talking about the defunding from the sponsors. We're talking about isolating the work of Palestinian civil society organizations from the global community. We're talking about the international community questioning the credibility or not. This is why we see the public statements as motivation that this part of a threat is not really happening on ground. But what I mean to say, the defunding of sponsors and organizations that have always supported the work of the Palestinian civil society organizations, like Addameer, for instance, this was not following the decision, but 2 weeks before, one of our core donors did not renew the contract for additional sponsors due to political pressures, as they clearly stated. So, sometimes international organizations do bow to these false accusations, and other times they publish statements where they say there are no bases, there are no substantial evidence. Regarding all that, we still stand and we do know that this is legitimate human rights work. So, arbitrary arrests are definitely an imminent risk at all employees, even the directors. This is not something that is bizarre by the Israeli occupation. As I mentioned, Shada Aouda is in prison still, and she's a 61-year-old woman. So no one is exempt from the threats that are happening.
Yeah, Asil, what's your response to that?
Yeah, adding to what Melina said, I think there's the individual level of how these designation, what the consequences are, but there's also the collective kind of impact on our work. And as Melina said, I just like to highlight that also these designations come under Israel's domestic law that is illegally applied into the occupied territory. And this law is basically vague in its definitions, and it can apply basically from 5 to 25 years of prison terms to the staff of our organizations. So this is on an individual level of how this will impact us. But I think also on the symbolic nature of our work as well. So for example, we do also kind of collective work, joint work together as organization. Melina and myself we're actually been working on advocating for the rights of Palestinians in Beta in Nablus, which since May, they have been protesting an unlawful settlement that was placed on their land illegally. And since then, what the Israeli occupying authorities have done is killing the protesters, the civilians, and injuring the civilians. There are now 7 Palestinians killed in Beta only since May. And Addameer, for example, has been also documenting the arrests in this area where dozens have been illegally and arbitrarily arrested as well. So this is the kind of work we do. And unfortunately, the Israeli authorities have distracted us from the work that we do. Instead of us now advocating for this is just an example, of course, the Beta case, but instead of us working to advocate for and the protection of the rights of people in Beta, we are now countering and trying to protect ourselves as well from this arbitrary and unlawful designation.
Yeah, that's part of it, right? I mean, that's it. It's how Israel lobby groups here in the U.S. and North America, they go after human rights defenders. They try and tie up their time and resources and finances in court and legal proceedings in order to get them to stop the work that they're doing. Can you, there was a diplomatic briefing on Wednesday by representatives of the six groups calling for immediate intervention to defend Palestinian human rights organizations and staff. And as I mentioned, Raja Shahade, the founder of Al-Haq, said recently the fact that Al-Haq and other rights groups have supplied evidence of war crimes by Benny Gantz himself to the International Criminal Court is a very probable reason Gantz made this declaration. What can you say about Gantz's personal connection to declaring Al-Haq and Addameer and the others as terrorist organizations, and the way that Israel itself, through the last 73 years, has been attempting to silence and attack any international body that could enact consequences for the entire Israeli project?
Yes, there is absolutely a connection between the decision and the advocacy on an international level, especially the International Criminal Court. Both our organizations and the DCI and other Palestinian civil society organizations are doing legal documentation to the ICC after their decision to open an investigation. Addameer is representing 3 victims before the ICC who are children, prisoner children who were transferred illegally inside the occupying territory, which is illegal under international law and international criminal law. And DCIP is also on representing victims before the ICC, as well as Al-Haq has many documentation regarding the systematic and widespread attacks and crimes against humanity that the Israeli occupation is doing on ground. So it is completely true. And since the decision of opening the investigation, it seems like things are moving on in the international community regarding the ICC. So we believe, like as Asil mentioned, it is a distraction for our work. There is so many violations of human rights that are being documented. And instead of following up on that or prosecuting and asking for accountability regarding these crimes, we're here advocating all together jointly to defend what Israel is crying wolf about. And the international community is just watching to see what secret evidence there is. This is completely bizarre at this point.
Asil, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can only say that we also see this as like a failed attempt after several years and decades of smearing campaigns and intimidations to Palestinian civil society organizations and human rights defenders. Like Israel have failed to challenge our work based on evidence or on law. So now it is trying to criminalize the whole Palestinian civil society work. And it is indeed related to our work towards accountability, but also there's widespread and mounting recognition of Israel as an apartheid regime as well by states and by the United Nations and by global civil society. So this is kind of intimidating Israel to eliminate any voice trying to expose its crimes and its or efforts seeking accountability, basically.
Finally, what are the next steps for your organizations now? And what can people around the world do to make their voices heard at the international level? I know that, in terms of like even financial support, it's almost impossible for people here in the US and in Europe to donate via PayPal or anything like that, because Israel has completely banned the use of monetary exchange platforms to support your work. What can people do right now?
Mobilize, take action, and most importantly, I'm not trying to advertise or whatnot. You need to follow the sources, which are the 6 organizations. We are calling for actions daily. We are calling for stands and rallies, actions for specific organizations or for individuals or for politicians. We're trying as much as possible to allow the international community to take its role regarding what's happening right now. So now is the time to really wake up and take action, whether it is with statements or speaking up to your parliamentarians, your elected officials. These are the specific, more the broader demands. I think, Asil, if you'd like to add to that, but it's important to really not think or take this lightly. Arbitrary measures will come escalating after this. So we do need to take action as soon as possible.
Yeah, I can only add that we are at risk at now, so we need protection, and protections comes from action. And as Melina said, one way to do so is to pressure policymakers by individuals can pressure their policymakers to call on Israel to end this designation and also to revoke the law itself. And any effort basically that Israel does to silence Palestinian resistance and voices against its violations. In relation to donors, I would say that this is donors, but also the international community who is supporting Palestinian civil society. This is the time, because we've been repeating the same demands since decades in relation to different violations that Israel has done since decades. But now is the time to actually act on their international obligations to pressure Israel to end the whole illegal situation against the Palestinian people as a whole.
Asil Abaje from Al-Haq and Milena Ansari from Addameer, thank you so much for all the work that you both do and the work of your colleagues. We will have links up on the Electronic Intifada blog post that accompanies this podcast, so people can check out more of your work and learn more about your organization and how you're fighting back and fighting for the rights of Palestinians. Thank you both so much, and please be safe. We'll check back with you soon. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman, and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada podcast. Over the years, activists around the US have organized to pass resolutions in support of Palestinian rights via their local city councils and have faced attacks by the Israel lobby. Today, we're looking at a particular case in Burlington, Vermont, where for months, more than 24 leftist groups have worked to get their city council to pass a resolution in explicit support of the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign, which would make it the first US city to do so. As blogger Richard Silverstein writes, quote, during the campaign, the groups worked tirelessly to gain the support of city council members. They secured the support of 7 of 12 members and believed they were assured of victory. But they didn't count on the overwhelming firepower of the local and national Israel lobby. It pulled out all the stops, flooding their council offices with up to 2,000 text and email messages, letters, and phone calls denouncing the resolution as anti-Semitic. Joining us to talk about this resolution, what the next steps for it are, and the importance of organizing such a campaign is Wafiq Faour of Vermonters for Justice in Palestine. Wafiq, thank you so much for being with us on the Electronic Intifada podcast.
Oh, thank you, Nora, and good to see you again. Good to see you again.
Likewise. So talk about this resolution. The Israel lobby claimed that it was easily defeated, but it actually isn't over yet. Can you talk about what the resolution says and its next steps?
I think the resolution, it was clear of our demand of withdrawal of Israel from occupied Arab land, what we mean 1967 lands that include Golan Heights, respecting human and equal rights of Palestinian Israeli citizens, and end the apartheid laws in Israel. And lastly, respecting American citizen who observe and call for BDS, which stands for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And Noura, we wrote this resolution and we worked on it prior to a success we have here in Vermont and city of Burlington, that we forced Ben and Jerry after almost a decade of activism to come with a statement calls for the end of their business in Israel and occupied territory. And both occasions came together because it was July 19th, the statement came out. We introduced our resolution after work with many people, mainly the committee within the city, that it's called Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, on the 20th, on the evening. So it's the second day exactly. After hearing within the committee and passing it the first meeting, we went to second meeting of the same committee. Our supporters there came in, and it was international news because the second day there were a lot of journalists, including Israeli journalists from Channel 13. I took him to the meeting, so it was over 3 days news in Israel as well. Contrary to our local Jewish siblings who says that they didn't know about it because they were in the same program like us. We didn't hide anything. Our call was very clear, mainly on respect of human rights and equal rights to the Palestinian people as well. After it passed committee, we had no control of the calendar ourselves. It is a parliamentarian calendar. So from the committee went to the full council on September 13th, Monday, September 13th. Now, the local Zionist supporters of Israel, they came out with two kinds of attack. One, they called us anti-Semitic and insensitive because we brought such resolution on high holiday of our Jewish siblings between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and that we are trying to single out Israel. And frankly, we worked very hard because we thought it is timely, not because we like to exercise our rights, which is we have all the right to do it. Timely because we built on it over the years. This is not the first time we wrote a resolution. We did it before, but 10 years ago, 11 years ago, it was no taker. As a matter of fact, the only interested person, council member, then it was from the Republican Party. We didn't call for BDS then, but at the same time, he told me, go and talk to the left. If they accepted, I'm accepting it. This time, we called every member of the council and we sent the resolution. We talked to our progressive members within the Burlington City Council. We had success with 6 of them and 1 independent who became the sponsor of the resolution. Now, all this talk, and we send the resolution to the lawyers of the city to make a comparison, what is the effect on the city? Because we didn't call the city for divestment. We called the respect of boycott, divestment, sanctions. And it has been sent to the mayor too. All through this time, we didn't hear anything. Friday before Monday, when the council supposed to meet, 4 of our local rabbis, they came with a statement in our local newspaper attacking the resolution. Immediately after, we saw hundreds of emails going to the council member and the mayor to reject it. There was a huge pressure to the sponsor council member, Ali Jiang, to withdraw before it comes to Monday. We rejected all that. We felt that some of the council members start to stop answering our calls. We felt the people who answered our calls, they told us about this emails coming from all over the United States. And it was 2 kinds of letters that later we discovered they came from Israeli lobbying groups like ICANN and ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. And the second surprise, it's some of the rabbis who attacked the resolution are people we meet on another occasions, because we are not working here on the Palestinian question. We build Palestinian question through social and racial work on the ground. So we sometimes, we see many members of the Jewish congregations and synagogues standing up with the migrants. And we bring the subjects we are migrants too. They stand with the Black Lives Matters. And we brought the apartheid racism existed on Israel. Against the southern wall, we talk about the wall they are building over there. Environmentalists, about what's happening in our water over there and the shoreline. So all our issues is the same issues we are fighting here in the United States. And we put a comparison between the inequity, the racial divide we are living here on education, on healthcare, on housing, and in judicial system. And we make a comparison based on a lot of studies taken place by Human Rights Watch, by Israeli human rights organization like Beit Salem, like Addameer and others. So we were not blindfolded when we went there. We were not adventure. We get 7 votes that they read the resolution. Nobody brought the subject of anti-Jewish or anti-Semitism, because us too, we are fighting against anti-Semitism. We too, we are fighting against Islamophobia and any kind of racism. So nobody brought that issue, that including the mayor who came in a statement against the resolution Monday at noon. So we know, even if we have the 7, that we didn't have a majority proof, even though we were banking on another 2 votes from the Democratic caucus, that they were not decided and they want to talk more about it, they want to study it. But we were sure that the subject of Palestinian human rights and equal rights and our rights as American citizens, it will be respected on Burlington City. Before we went into the city hall, we had a huge rally. I mean, over 150 people. And we went to the city hall. But 10 minutes after 6, when the rally, we learned one of the greatest supporters within the council, she's not going to show up. So we know our situation is in a shaky ground because she was very sick. but we entered over there, and the council who sponsored our resolution said, I am under so much pressure to pull it out, and I've been called left and right about it. And frankly, he told me he's scared for his family, for his daughter, for his well-being. I mean, he told me things that he didn't tell anybody, like traveling in Tuesday overseas, and people will tell him, oh, have a nice trip. So he felt it like his life is threatened. But we insisted that we need the debate. The debate is necessary.
And it is going to happen. Is that right? Do you have a date for when that?
No, it took place that same evening. I mean, it started 7:30. We left the city hall at 2:00 in the morning.
Huh.
So the debate happened, and the people who were forcing our council member, the sponsor, at the end, even though we were 2-1, and you can go to the video, you can see the difference. The difference is what we are living now. You have a mixed people who look like the future of this country, coming from all walk of life with all the colors possible, standing with us, standing with the Palestinian human rights and equal rights for racial justice too. And you have older generation of Zionist Jewish, they repeated the same thing, that bringing this issue during the holy days, it's anti-Semitic, and they called us all names possible. And we were 2-1 on that. But at the end, they insisted, our opponents on the council, to put things to the vote. And when we know our numbers are not sufficient even to vote for, and we are threatened by veto, we ask our council member to pull it out, and we will bring it on another day. And the vote can tell you this is the outcome, because the 6 voted to pull it out and not to shelf it. And our opponents, they had 5 votes. So how to describe this? Absolutely, we didn't win the resolution we hoped for, but they lost. They lost the vote they wished for, because they call it, we want to put everybody in record, and they made the whole debate anti-Semitism. So we are preparing now for the next round. We are in contact with the same council members, and we're going through education, and we can talk about it more.
Thanks for that. You know, the way that these Israel lobby groups are attacking people who stand up for Palestinian rights, of course, you know, this like very well-worn smear campaign of anti-Semitism, you know, when it has absolutely nothing to do with acts of bigotry against Jews. How do activists fight that? How, you know, what's the advice that you can give to activists who are, you know, considering this kind of campaign to get their local city council to act, you know, for Palestinian rights, or to support BDS? What do you say to activists who are like, oh God, if I'm going to be, you know, smeared as an anti-Semite by these very powerful lobby groups, what's the point? I might as well not even try. What do you say to them?
I think, as a Palestinian, I will say we are now on different place. So don't ever lose hope of what will happen on the future. I mean, the future with us. And at the end, we're going to win because of, if we want talk about justice and human rights, the history in our side. So don't be shaken by these results. As a matter of fact, I want other cities and communities to take over this resolution, and we can help them too from Vermont to do it. We kept it local. We tried even not to bring religious figures, even though we have faith-based organization were supporting us, because we don't want to make it religious. They brought 4 rabbis. And as a matter of fact, my biggest surprise at the end, the last speaker who gave testimony, he was a Jewish rabbi, David Friedman from Natur Karyat, we call it in Arabic, even though they are minority, but I believe he's not from Burlington, definitely. What I'm going to say, the action itself to bring this debate to a city or to any municipality by itself, it's a victory. Because even the local newspapers and the local TV, they covered this occasion completely different than what our opponents wished. We had a space for the first time to say what we believe and how the future going to look like to build a peaceful community here and back on Palestine, Israel. So the action itself is a victory, and we will never accept that it's a defeat, you know? As a matter of fact, they wish that the vote will be against us, and second day, they will say Burlington rejecting PDS. Burlington is not rejecting PDS, you know? The other thing is we are facing attack, and now it's a specific based on a strategy. Like, let's say, using the holidays as an excuse, as an attack, as an anti-Semitic. I learned later it's the only other resolution, and it didn't come to the city of Cambridge from activists, or as we call them, BDSers. It came from 3 council members to boycott HP, you know.
Hewlett Packard, yeah.
Yeah, the first excuse was they shouldn't have brought it to the council on a holiday, and they created holiday. I mean, they going to bring holiday because we have only 365 days a year, and you're going to find holiday or commemoration on every day, on every week, because of a long history of our Jewish siblings. So our opponents using that, but here in Burlington, the strongest supporters we have are from our Jewish community too. So don't forget that. This is one. Right. 2, I heard from so many, personally, I received calls from members of the synagogues that they are revolting against it. Before the statement of the rabbis came in, and after that. As a matter of fact, if you read the statement, the signatures of the statements, the 4 rabbis, they signed only their names as a rabbi of such congregation, but not by the boards, because many boards rejected. And if you read the forward article about what happened, many other rabbis rejected to sign on it. So we are in the right direction, because at the end, us, the Palestinians, and who people support us, and the Jewish community, we're going to live forever. I mean, this is not a selective choice. This is our future together. So at the end, I believe us and many younger generation from our Jewish siblings, we're going to come to a conclusion that all of us, we will be proud.
Thank you, Wafiq. And you mentioned the Ben and Jerry's campaign earlier, and I want to kind of pivot a little bit to that. Vermonters for Peace and Justice, Vermonters for Justice in Palestine was really the spearhead group that took on the ice cream makers profiting from Israeli colonization. Can you tell us a little bit about your reaction to Ben & Jerry's finally saying over the summer that they wouldn't sell ice cream in the illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank? And what are the next steps in that fight?
The Ben & Jerry, this is the thing. I mean, we were definitely excited about the statements. We've been working on this campaign over 10 years. And we met Ben & Jerry executives and we tried to negotiate something to come out. They went to multi-trips to educate themselves about the situation over there, but many times they shut the door in our face. To come to that conclusion, we always, every year, in 2 occasions at least, we were on the streets for Ben & Jerry Free Cone Day and a big festival in Burlington called Al-Haq, where Ben & Jerry, part of relating to our community, local community, they will give free ice cream. We use Ben & Jerry's campaign for education because, as you know, for the longest time until now, many American, they will say, why you're talking about Palestine? Israel is far away. We have nothing to do with it. So to relate the subject that benefiting and profiting from occupation is against international law, we use these tools. But majority of us, we're older in VTGP. And for that, a younger generation of activists, mainly I will give a credit to organization called Decolonize Burlington. After May 15, the commemoration of the Nakba rally, which is hundreds of people, almost 500 people showed up. And we had petition to Ben & Jerry was present. They took Ben & Jerry to their account and they put it on Instagram, on Twitter, and within 3-4 days, they shut Ben & Jerry Twitters completely, and we stopped seeing anything come from Ben & Jerry. And they forced Ben & Jerry to come to the table to talk to them from board's members, which is, we know they are progressive, but they were absolutely timid to make that move, to the executive, which is they made that move. Of course, we know that there is a statement coming and we were waiting for it, but when it came on a form of 3 different statements, it built confusion. We have the statements of the board, which is very clear. We're leaving at the end of 2022 from Israel and occupied Palestine, and the other one from the executive. We're leaving by 2022, but we're going to stay on Israel in one form or another. And the parents company Unilever, which is we are not leaving. But now we are facing a new dynamics that many states, because of anti-PDS laws, are boycotting Unilever and divesting. And we heard, I think, from recently from Florida, from New Jersey, and I believe maybe Arizona, and Texas are studying it. I call to the our activists. I'll tell them this is our opportunity. For all means, boycott and BDS, and let's adopt one kind of a product and go for it, like Pillsbury or any or Puma or any other product. Yes. But it's an opportunity to go after the anti-BDS laws. Us locally and all across the United States, we have to prepare ourselves to go after such unlawful and unethical way some state that they are putting an American First Amendment in jeopardy. So it will be the actual debate between us and the American public. is a freedom of speech to some, but not to the others. You know, I feel as a Palestinian, like the Black people, like the migrants and indigenous, the otherization exists. But when it comes to the First Amendment, this is a test for the American Constitution and the lawmakers. And I am wondering when all of us activists across the United States, we will go after these laws, because every time these laws went to the court, they lost.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in all federal courts, they've been denounced as unconstitutional, right?
Yes.
Wafiq, if people want to get in touch with you and your group and want to learn more about what's happening in Burlington, where can they go? What can they do?
vkgp.org, our organization, or if you want my phone number, you can ask Noura.
I'll weed out the queries there. Wafiq Faur from Vermonters for Justice in Palestine, thank you so much for all that you do and for being with us today on the Electronic Intifada podcast. Please do keep us posted about what's happening in Burlington.
Thank you, Noura. Love to talk to you. Take care.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit like, leave a comment. These engagements help us with the YouTube algorithm, and it helps us to get around Silicon Valley censorship as much as possible. It does make a difference. You can also support our journalism by going to electronicintifada.net and clicking on donate now. Thank you.